Rocky, plenty to dive into this week on the back of another big weekend of footy. Plenty of blowouts that we saw over the weekend. What did you make of it all?
Yeah, interesting round of footy. We've still got a bit to learn. I think we were both pretty bullish on the Adelaide Crows. They've been disappointing to start the season, the first couple of games. St Kilda were good. On Thursday night, Fremantle again won with a few injuries about. Melbourne, impressive. Hawthorn, your boys were very disappointing, I thought. But I think, again, Sydney stamped their authority, and the Giants, again, they took on West Coast. But the Sydney teams, again, I think are a step above the competition in the early part of the season.
Yeah, it does feel like the Sydney teams are absolutely flying right now. We won't talk too much about the Hawks just yet. One team you did just mention, though, is St Kilda. So let's go all the way back to Thursday night. We touched on the Saints last week after that close loss to Geelong, and I think I said I thought they were the better team on the night, and we've seen that translate into a massive win over the reigning premiers. Defensively, we know that St Kilda set up really nicely behind the ball. Last year, dead last in fewest points allowed, and this year that's continued. They ranked third. What's changed, though, is I think in only 2 games, it's a small sample size, but we're seeing a lot more run through the midfield. Wangani Malira, 32 touches against the Pies. Jack Steele was outstanding as well. Mitch Owens getting a lot of the footy. Just felt like they really ran the Pies off their feet. Surprisingly, from a betting standpoint, you can get $2.50 for St Kilda to make the 8, $6 for them to finish top 4. To me, I think that's really good value. Rocky, do you think that the Saints are marching into the top 8 contention again this year?
Yeah, I think they'll be thereabouts. Again, they're going to be in that logjam from sort of 6 to 12 or however it plays out. But I think they're good enough too. You spoke about it. Good teams are built off defence, and St Kilda's defence is really strong. We've spoken about that. But if they can add that element of the run and carry, which you spoke about, off half-back through the corridor, it'll be interesting to see this week at Marvel how their offense stacks up, because that'll tell us how good their ball movement is. It's a fast-moving ground. Their defense, if their defense stacks up and then they can shift the footy, get the overlap, I think they'll tick a lot of boxes and be marching, as you said, because if they can get Essendon done this weekend, then they've got Richmond the week after. It sort of builds a bit of momentum, then a really good test against the Giants. So they've got an opportunity in the next couple of weeks. We'll find out a lot more about them. It's probably too early to tell, but they've ticked all the right boxes. As you said, probably should have beaten Geelong down there, which is a massive win if you can win down there. But I think we'll find out a lot once they've played at Marvel Stadium.
It is hard to get carried away with a team that's had such a poor history like St Kilda, but I do think they are one of the most dangerous teams. And as you sort of just said then, they set up so nicely behind the ball and almost frustrated Collingwood on attack last week, really took away a lot of the options, been really strong around the clearances as well. Another game I want to dive into coming up in round 3 is your old mob, Port Adelaide, taking on Melbourne in what should be a bit of a cracker on Saturday night under the lights of the Adelaide Oval. Very close game between these two last year. Port ran out 4-point winners in round 10. Very low scoring game that one was. Obviously, the midfield's going to be the big talking point here. Clayton Oliver's back in form. Great to see him back on the footy field. Petrarca's doing his usual thing. And then on the other side, Zach Butters and Rosie getting plenty of the footy as well. Rocky, if you're having a bet on this game, who do you think you'd be pretty keen on in the disposal markets?
Disposal markets, I think it'll be a shootout. So I think they'll all get touches. I think Viney normally goes to a Wines or something like that. Good matchup. I think Wines is starting to find his best form in that midfield as well through his clearances. I think Butters will get plenty of the footy. Rosie will get plenty of it. I think they all will. I don't think there'll be too much defence going on from either midfield group. They'll shake hands at the start. It depends who Willem Drew goes to. He probably goes to Oliver. Petrarca has that flexibility to drift forward a bit more. So Oliver might be a bit of a watch. He may not have the impact that he's had in the past. We know the jobs that Willem Drew can do. But disposals markets, I'd be pretty confident in majority of them having 25 plus. I think I'd be leaning towards Port Adelaide in the game just because of Melbourne's lack of defence now. We know how potent Port Adelaide's forward half are with a few injuries for Melbourne. They're going to be hard to stop those Port Adelaide forwards. Port have got to take their opportunities when they go inside 50, but the game is going to be won in the middle of the ground, as you touched on. Max Gawn will give Melbourne a good look, but on the other side as well, Port Adelaide, I think they're getting their hands on the footy. Horn Francis, does he come back in as well? So it's an exciting game and probably almost a game of the round, if not the game of the round, third versus fourth.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think from a betting perspective anyway, it's worth noting that Petrarca and Oliver have both averaged close to 27 disposals in their last 5 games against Port. But it is going to be very interesting to see how Melbourne plays without potentially Stephen May and Jake Lever, 2 really big outs. We also saw Melbourne against Hawthorn last week. The Hawks spent way too much time focusing on Clayton Oliver, and that cost them about 5 goals in that first term. So I'm sure Melbourne will be keen to avoid that silly mistake as well. Quickly, I want to go a bit rapid fire here because there's been a handful of players that are yet to fire, particularly in the Coleman market. Toby Greene is the name that leaps off the page. 66 goals last year, 4th in the Coleman chase. He's only kicked 2 so far. We spoke about GWS plenty last week, but the Giants are on the bye this week, come back in round 4 to face the Gold Coast Suns. Do you think Toby's going to be a threat in the Coleman this year, or is there too many weapons up forward there at the Giants?
Yeah, I'm not sure he will be, will he? Because we've seen him just take games apart, kick major goals, but they've got a few different avenues to goal now. So Toby just hasn't found the form that he had previously. For a Coleman race, I don't think he's any chance probably to finish top 5 at all now. So with Hogan and those guys down in that forward half, Hogan's obviously in really good form as well, but Toby Greene, a little bit slow start to the season.
The other name is Taylor Walker. So he was 2nd in the Coleman chase last year, 76 goals. He's only kicked a pair himself as well. Looked like he might be in for a big night against the Cats, but then just sort of didn't do much in that second half. The Crows, as you said at the start, take on Freo this week in Perth. Massive game for them. Tex kicked 4 against the Dockers in round 4 last year. Do you think we're going to get to see Tex start to heat up in these next few weeks?
Well, he's carrying that back niggle, isn't he? So he didn't play the first game and then only 2 on the weekend, and a couple of contests where he looks like he could have bent over to pick it up. He decided to kick it off the ground. So I reckon he's still carrying the back a little bit. So he might be good for another 1 or 2. But yeah, I think I don't think his body's 100% at the moment. So until he can get that body back to where it needs to be, I don't think we'll see Big Texan kicking those big bags.
The other big forward who's now out with an injury is Oscar Allen, which is a big loss for West Coast for the next couple of months with minor knee surgery. Look, if you're actually game enough to bet on West Coast players to kick goals, do you think we should be looking at the likes of Yeo, Waterman, Jack Darling was their 2nd leading goal kicker last year? Those 3 names are the ones that punters would want to be focusing on?
Oh, I wouldn't be brave to put any bets on West Coast players kicking goals. I think they're a long way off. They're so hard to gauge, and 43 points on the weekend, round 1, 70 points against Port Adelaide. Port Adelaide went inside 53 times for 40 scores. Had they kicked more goals, I don't think West Coast would have got anywhere near 70 points. So you'd be a brave punter out there if you were backing any West Coast players to kick goals.
West Coast take on the Dogs on Sunday at Marvel. They actually beat the Western Bulldogs late last year, so maybe that's a danger game for the Dogs. No, probably not, but it's probably going to be a big blowout. But let's move on to the multi. Very stiff last week, Rocky. Melbourne's a cover versus Hawthorn. We got the tick there. The Swans 1-39. We got the tick there, but unfortunately, Big Benny Brown didn't kick 2 goals for us.
He didn't kick any. I think he had a set shot on the siren for about his 2nd shot on goal. I think he kicked a point. Ben Brown, never again list for me. He's
on the no bet list. There we go. This week, we're going big. We haven't even got one up this year, but we've decided to go for double figures. Look, I'm going to start us on Thursday night. I'm going Collingwood plus 16.5 against Brisbane. I just think teams having a bye this early in the year could prove a bit of a hindrance for the Lions. And I also think the Pies getting away from the MCG takes a little bit of the pressure off there. I just think that's a big line between 2 clubs that are off to very slow starts. And I also thought the Pies started to show some signs late against St Kilda last week. So there is something for them to build on. Rocky, you lead us off in the next leg. Who have you got?
Yeah, we're going to Good Friday, North Melbourne versus Carlton. I think Harry Sheasel for 30 plus at $1.92. I think he's a ball magnet. I'm not sure that Carlton will put a lot of time and effort into him off half-back. I think he'll find plenty of footy, and if North are to be anywhere in that game, he's going to have to, and he just finds a way to get touches. So I think he is a good bet at 30 plus.
Very good value as well. And you've also included another player to kick 2 goals. You're sticking fat with the player markets.
Yeah, I am. I'm going the player markets. I'm trying to get the value for us. So Sunday afternoon, the Western Bulldogs take on West Coast at Marvel Stadium. I'm going the Bont 2+. I think he hits the scoreboard as good as any midfielder in the competition, and I think he'll feast on the West Coast Eagles. I'd almost put him down for 3 votes. I think he'll have a day out, potentially kick even more than 2. I think he's good for 3 or 4 on the weekend. So 2+ at some good value there as well at $2.35.
Very juicy. Lastly, I've included Melbourne plus 14.5. I just think they've had a tougher start to the year. I know they've got those injuries, but a bit more battle tested than Port Adelaide right now. And I think they're starting to figure some things out up forward. So I like the plus 14.5 line about Melbourne. So just to recap, we've got Collingwood plus 16.5 against Brisbane on Thursday night. I've gone Melbourne to cover against Port Adelaide. Rocky, you've got the 2+ goals and Harry Sheasel 30+ disposals. Wrap all that up, we got $16. Pretty good value.
Very good value, very juicy, and it'll be a nice way to start our first win for the season.
That one is, of course, available on the Neds app in the special section. Great segment as always, Rocky. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Well done, Ryan.